Hi everyone, Meg here from Home Place Creative, and today I'm going to be giving you my best tips for speaking to a camera. But I want to start off by talking about why you should listen to me in terms of being a better speaker on camera. So prior to becoming a professor, where I teach public speaking as part of my role, I was a television news reporter, which meant that every single day I was speaking into a camera. And in that role, I performed many duties. So one was as an anchor. I would fill in as an anchor. And that experience was way different from being a reporter. I'm going to explain to you why here. Because when I was an anchor, I was in a studio. It was a controlled environment. There were lots of lights on me. And yes, that was very intimidating. But the thing I loved about it was that I had a script to read that was running right below my camera. So I didn't have to think about what I was going to say next. Sure, I knew what it said because I read my scripts, but primarily I wasn't talking on the fly. The other job I had was as a reporter, and I was what was at the time called a one-man band reporter. I believe the correct term now is multimedia journalist. And when I was a multimedia journalist, I had to go out in public, imagine this, and talk to a camera. I had to set up my shot. There were usually people milling around, and I had to think about what I was going to say and say it. And sometimes I had to say it over and over and over. I would count myself down. I would say 3, 2, 1, and I would talk. You can imagine how silly this looked in public and how many strange stares I got. So I learned to be very efficient in talking to a camera very quickly. The other thing I did was go live on television, and that was also, as you might imagine, very intimidating. I was not a natural at speaking into a camera. It was something that I had to work at, and something that I honestly at times felt like I was going to throw up before the camera went on. I remember my first live shot out at the county fair, and I was so sick. But I did it, and I got through, and my nerves, of course, came across the screen. But the next time I did better and better and better. So that's my first point. My first point about getting better when speaking to a camera is to just practice. Set up your smartphone, set up your webcam, and just practice. Practice being comfortable in front of the camera, speaking directly into the camera, and finding out what your style is in terms of speaking. Whether you're giving a presentation or, again, you want to get better at video presentations, I believe that practicing and speaking over and over and over into a camera is the best way that you're going to learn. So you'll figure out what's natural to you and what seems unnatural. So those are just things that you have to figure out, and the best way to do it is to do it over and over and over again. So the other things I wanted to talk about very briefly were more of the technical side of speaking to a camera. You need to think about your shot. So right now my shot, instead of being directly on, is shot slightly upwards. I did this because a photography technique of shooting slightly upwards means that I'm going to come off as more authoritative to you and that more powerful, and that's just how things were shot. A great example of this that I use with students is if you look at the World War II, the posters that came out of Germany with Hitler, they're all shot way up, and there was a reason for that. So the other alternative is to shoot down. That's going to make someone seem less important, seem smaller. And then if you shoot at an equal level, we're putting ourselves at an equal level with the audience. So you want to think about what angle you're taking and how you want to set that up. The other thing to consider is light. Right now I'm filming, there is an open window directly behind the camera. That's because I'm using the natural light on my DSLR to shoot, because that is the best way to shoot. That's what comes across as looking pretty on a camera. So even if you're using your smartphone, use the natural light around you as best you can. You don't want things to come off as dark and unprofessional. You want to be able to be seen by your audience, and you want them to feel that they can see you. The next set of advice I want to talk to you all about deals directly with how to talk into a camera. The first thing that you want to do is to prepare your content. This seems so obvious, but there are times when I was just going to shoot one of these blogs and I would sit down and say, all right, I'm just going to talk to the camera because I know what I'm going to say. And you can imagine that would end up taking like 5 times as long as I thought that it originally would, because I actually had no idea what I was going to say. And I figured it out while I was talking to the camera, but I could have saved myself a lot of time, energy, and heartache by just practicing what I was going to say. So always prepare your content. Make sure you've practiced it a few times before you actually speak to the camera for the first time, and you're just going to have a way better experience all around, because cameras are intimidating. The next piece of advice has to deal with talking naturally. One of the things that I really wish I would have known was this piece of advice. I wish somebody would have shaken me and said, Megan, just be yourself. Because when I started off as a news reporter, I really tried to be like your authoritative broadcast news person. And one of my biggest self-critiques was my voice. I have a very naturally nasal voice. My news director would tell me that, but that's the way I talk. But a lot of the people that I admired in news at the time were talking in the broadcaster voice. So they were thinking about the way that they were talking. They were accentuating each word, right? I mean, it came off as very inauthentic and unnatural, just like I did for you. You want to come across as genuine. You want people to connect with you through this screen that you're shooting on, so you have to sound like yourself. I think it's great to want to emulate people and speakers that you admire, but I do think that when it all boils down, you want to come across as yourself. That's how people are going to relate to you, and that's how they're going to engage with your content. So you want to try and speak as naturally as you can. So that goes to my next piece of advice, and this is a very personal piece of advice that you can take or leave, but I don't script things out. I used to script things out before I would talk to a camera, and it would totally mess me up, because if I had one word that I didn't say, or I forgot a sentence, or I forgot a point, I would completely unravel, and it would just come off as horrible. It would throw me off kilter, and I wouldn't be able to perform the same way as if I just pretended that I was talking to a friend or giving advice to a student. So in order to come off naturally, I do advise perhaps making some bullet points about what you want to talk about, which is what I did here today, but I do not advise creating a script. I think it's going to make you come off as just not as natural, and you're going to come off as, I don't know, inauthentic is maybe a way to say it. We see a lot of these scripted comments from like CEOs when there's a crisis or something, and everybody knows they're reading a line that was written by someone in their public relations department, and it doesn't come off as thoughtful or genuine, and so we don't believe or trust that person. So you always want to come across as believable and trustworthy, whatever you're doing, whatever reason you're talking to a camera. So I would advise not scripting stuff out for those two reasons. But again, that's just my personal advice that you can take or leave. And that brings me to my final point, which is practice talking to the camera, but also practice like you're talking to a friend. I know I just mentioned this, but one of my dear friends who was a news anchor for a very long time gave me this advice, and it stuck with me, and I still do it now. Think of a person who is like in the camera. He said that he used to picture his grandma. Every time that camera went on and they started the newscast, he pictured his grandma right into the camera. That was the person that he was talking to, and that was the way that he told a story. Imagine the power of that for the audience on the other side of the camera. So you really have to picture the people that you're speaking to. So those are my tips. They're pretty easy. I hope that they help you. I hope that you're able to apply them. And I hope that, like me, you get over your fear of speaking to a camera, because I'm sure that there is a ton of knowledge that you have to offer the world, but you can't do it if you're afraid. And one last final piece of advice. Just remember that you're not going to be great when you start. I wish I could pull out some of my old tapes from when I was first a journalist on air, because it's painful to watch. But it's also really awesome to see how far I've come and how far I've grown, and I think about how much better I can be the more I continue to do stuff like this. So I hope that this helps, and I hope that you're able to apply it. I hope that you get out your camera and you start practicing today.